The clearest, yes. It is always the same. It is not a battle, not a grand moment. It is just a few seconds on a cold, wet street in a town I cannot even be sure of the name anymore. Perhaps it was Ramsdorf. The name doesn't matter. We were falling back. The British tanks were coming, and we were just boys trying to get across an open space, a street between two rows of broken houses. It was late March 1945. The war was lost, though we didn't dare say it. We just knew we had to survive the next 5 minutes. I was with my friend. His name was Klaus. He was from a village near mine. We had trained together. He was younger than me, I think, maybe 17. He had this way of smiling, even when things were terrible. We were crouched behind a pile of bricks that used to be a wall. The air was full of smoke and the smell of wet plaster, and I could hear it, the sound of a tank, the clank of the tracks on the cobblestones. It is a sound you never forget. It gets inside your bones. Klaus looked at me, ready to run across the street to the next building. I grabbed his arm. I said, "Klaus, wait. Wait for the tank to fire. It will fire at the building, then it has to reload. That is our chance. Do not run now." He just looked at me, impatient. He wanted to go. He thought he was fast enough. He said, "I'll see you on the other side, Gert." And he smiled that stupid, brave smile. He started to run. He was maybe 5 steps into the open. I was screaming, "No," but the sound was swallowed by everything else. I saw the flash from the tank's cannon down the street. It was not even aimed at him. It was aimed at the corner of the building he was running toward. But the shell, a high explosive shell, it doesn't need to hit you. The explosion, the force of it, it just picked him up and threw him against the wall he had just left. There was nothing left, just a red stain on the gray bricks. It was over in a second. I had warned him. I had told him exactly what would happen, and it did. That is the memory. Not the fighting, not the hunger, just that quiet moment of watching my friend disappear because he wouldn't wait for 3 more seconds. The beginning. It felt like a different world, a different Germany. My full name is Gert Friedrich Franz Schmitz. I was born into a country that felt ashamed. My father and my grandfather, they fought in the Great War. They told stories of the trenches, but mostly they spoke of the defeat, of the treaty that crippled us, of the hunger and the worthless money in the 20s. There was a grayness to everything, a feeling that we had been punished and forgotten. Then, in 1933, everything changed. Suddenly there was color. There were parades, flags everywhere, music in the streets. This man Hitler, he came on the radio. His voice was electric. He promised to make Germany strong again, to give us back our pride. And for a boy, it was intoxicating. Suddenly there was work. My father had a steady job. There was food. The trains ran on time. There was order. Oh, the order. They had everything organized. You could not get lost or fall through the cracks, you know. There were no, "Oh, cracks." You were part of something whether you liked it or not. I was drafted into the Hitler Youth when I was 10 years old. 10. They gave us a uniform, a sharp brown shirt with the armband, a dagger. For a boy, a uniform and a dagger. It is a powerful thing. You feel important. You feel like you belong to a tribe, a very strong tribe. We would march, sing songs, go camping. It felt like an adventure. We were taught that Germany was the greatest nation on earth, that we were a special people, and that we had enemies who wanted to hold us down. We believed it. How could we not? It was all we ever heard. It was on the radio, in the newspapers, in the schoolhouse. It was our entire world. Oh, very clearly, I remember the day, September the 1st, 1939. I was 14. We were all gathered around the Volksempfänger, the people's radio, and Hitler's voice came on, telling us that the war had started. He said, since 5 o'clock this morning, our troops are marching into Poland. He didn't say invading. He said they were responding to Polish aggression, that they were doing whatever they do best. There was a strange feeling in the room, a mix of excitement and something else, a little bit of fear. But the propaganda was so strong. Goebbels, the propaganda minister, he was a genius, a terrible genius. He controlled everything. The news only told us of our great victories, the Polish army collapsing in days, the French falling in weeks. We saw the newsreels in the cinema, our soldiers marching into Paris. It seemed impossible that we could ever lose. The thought was, it was unthinkable. It was not even remotely in my mind that we could ever lose a war. We were so conditioned. I remember talking to my grandpa. He was a quiet man. He had seen the last war. He listened to the radio with me, and when the announcer was finished, he just shook his head. He told me, Gert, if they want to win this war against the whole world, it does not look too good. I was angry with him. I told him, Grandfather, don't say that. We cannot lose. I truly believed it. But sometimes you would hear things. We lived not so far from the western border, and the radio would tell us the front was deep in France, that everything was secure. But then, at night, we would walk outside and we could hear the guns, a low rumble far away, but there. And you would think to yourself, that sound is too close for where they tell us the fighting is supposed to be. It was the first little crack in the story. The first time I thought, maybe what they are telling us is not the whole truth. It was like living in two different countries, but on the same piece of land. My first memories are gray, not just in my mind, but the color of things. I remember my father's face when he would come home from looking for work. The lines on it were so deep. He fought in the Great War, you see, and he came home a hero to a country that had nothing for him, nothing for anyone. My mother would boil potatoes, and that would be a good day. There was this feeling, a heaviness, a national shame. The adults spoke in whispers about the Treaty of Versailles, about the money we owed, about how our pride had been stolen. You could feel it as a boy, even if you didn't understand the words. You feel the hunger in your own belly. You see the quiet desperation in your parents' eyes. That was the first Germany I knew. Then suddenly, the color came back. It started in 1933. I was just a small boy, but I remember the change. Suddenly there were flags everywhere, bright red with the black swastika. There were parades, music in the streets. My father got a job working on the new Autobahn. He came home and he was standing straight again. He looked my mother in the eye. We had sausage. It felt like a miracle. And at the center of it all was this one man's voice on the radio, Adolf Hitler. He spoke of destiny, of honor, of restoring Germany. And for a country that had been on its knees, his words were like water in a desert. He was giving us back our pride. We didn't see the darkness behind it. We only saw the light he was promising. The machine was being built around us, this total organized world. And then, when I was 10 years old, the machine came for me. I was drafted into the Hitler Youth. It wasn't a question. It was just what happened. One day you are a boy playing with sticks. The next you are handed a uniform, a belt with a buckle that says blood and honor, and a small dagger. For a 10-year-old boy, that is the most powerful thing you have ever held. You are no longer just Gert Schmitz. You are part of something enormous, something important. You are part of the future. It was a complete education, not just in books, but in body and spirit. At first, it was things any boy would love. We went camping in the forests, learned to build fires, tie knots, read maps. We sang songs around the campfire, songs about the fatherland, about camaraderie, about the glory of sacrifice. We played sports, endless sports, to make our bodies hard. The weak were weeded out. You learned very quickly not to complain, not to show pain. But the games began to change. The map reading was no longer for hiking. It was for planning a patrol. The long marches were not just for fun. They were to build endurance for the battlefield. Soon we were learning to handle small caliber rifles. We would lie on our bellies for hours, learning to shoot straight. We practiced throwing dummy grenades, what we called potato mashers, learning the right arc to get it into a trench. They were turning boys into soldiers, step by step, and we were eager pupils. But the most important training was for the mind. Every week we had political indoctrination. We sat in halls and listened to leaders tell us about our destiny as the master race. They told us why the Jews were our enemies, why the communists were a disease. They explained the stab in the back of 1918, how our politicians and enemies had betrayed our brave soldiers. They drilled it into us over and over, and you must understand we believed it. We believed every single word. It was all we ever heard. It was in our school books, it was on the radio, it was in the films we watched. They created an entire world for us, a fortress of ideas, and we lived inside its walls. There was no room for doubt. To doubt was to be a traitor. The bond we had, we boys, it was stronger than family. We would have died for each other. We were told that was the greatest honor a German man could have, to die for his friends and for the Führer. They prepared us to die, and we called it living. I remember it perfectly. It was a late summer morning. I was with my family in the living room. We had one of the Volksempfänger, the people's radio. It was a small, simple box, but it was our connection to the leadership, to Berlin. An announcement came on that the Führer would be addressing the nation. Everything stopped. The whole country held its breath, and then his voice filled the room. It was electric, that voice. It was full of anger and power. He said that Poland had been attacking our people on the border, and that on the night before, Polish soldiers had attacked a German radio station. He said, since 5:45 a.m., we have been returning fire. He didn't say we were invading. He said we were defending ourselves, a righteous action. Of course, we know now it was all a lie, a staged attack by our own SS. But then, we believed it as gospel. The Führer would not lie to us. My first feeling was excitement, a thrill. I was 13 years old. For years we had been singing songs of glory, of battle. Now it was real. We boys, we were almost jealous of the older ones who could go. We thought it would be a grand adventure, over in a few weeks. We would show the world the strength of the new Germany. but I remember looking at my grandfather. He had fought at Verdun in the First War. He had seen things I could not imagine. He didn't say a word. He just stood by the window looking out, and his face was made of stone. Later that evening I said something to him, something foolish like, "We will teach them a lesson they will never forget." He put his hand on my shoulder, and his grip was so tight. He looked at me and said, "Boy, in war there are no lessons, only ghosts." I didn't understand him then, but I would. Oh, I would. In my mind and the minds of all my friends, the thought that we could lose this war was impossible. It was like imagining the sun would not rise. We were so conditioned, so certain of our destiny. We were the 1,000-year Reich. How could 1,000 years end in just a few? The very idea was unthinkable. Oh yes, flying was everything. It was the future. When you were 17 years old in Germany at that time, you don't think about politics. You don't think about the grand strategy of the war. You think about adventure. You think about glory. And for us, the Luftwaffe was the pinnacle of that. The pilots were heroes, you know. Their pictures were in the papers. They were knights of the modern age. I had been in the Hitler Youth, of course, since I was 10. We learned to fly gliders. The feeling of leaving the earth, it's something you never forget. It's quiet, it's freedom. So when the opportunity came, they asked me, "Gert Schmitz, do you want to go to a jet pilot training school?" A jet pilot. This was 1944. We were hearing about these new weapons, these miracle weapons that would turn the tide of the war. And the Messerschmitt 262, it was like something from another world, faster than anything the Americans or the British had. To be chosen to fly that, it was more than an honor. It was a destiny. I saw myself shooting down bombers, defending the homeland from the sky. It was a clean war up there, I thought, not like the mud and the blood of the infantry. It was pure. I said yes faster than I have ever said yes to anything in my life. I was going to be a jet pilot. I was going to save Germany. That's what a 17-year-old boy believes. It was crushed before it even began. That's the truth of it. We were full of hope. We took the train to the training school in Fuller, Germany. We were all so excited, a whole group of us young men, talking about how we would master these new machines. We imagined the power, the speed. We were singing songs on the train. We felt invincible. And then we arrived, and there was nothing, just silence and smoke. The Americans had come a few days before us. The hangars were twisted skeletons of metal, black and smoldering. The runways were filled with craters so deep you could stand in them and not see over the edge. And the airplanes, our beautiful jets, they were just heaps of wreckage. Some were torn in half. Others were riddled with so many holes they looked like Swiss cheese. One was just a tail sticking up out of a pile of rubble. I walked through it. I remember kicking a piece of metal, and I realized it was part of a cockpit. The place where I was supposed to sit, it was all gone. The dream died right there, in that field of debris. All that power, all that technology, and it was destroyed on the ground before it ever had a chance. It was my first real lesson of the war. The stories they told us on the radio, the promises of miracle weapons, they meant nothing against the reality of thousands of Allied bombers. They owned the sky, and they had smashed my future into pieces before I even had a chance to touch it. What do you do with a group of healthy, trained young men when you are losing a war? You give them a rifle and you send them to the front. There was no discussion, there was no choice. An officer, he didn't look much older than us, just tired. He gathered us together. He looked at the list on his clipboard and said, "There is nothing for you to do here. We will temporarily assign you to a paratrooper outfit. You will be sent to the Western Front." Just like that. From a pilot's seat to a foxhole. We were Luftwaffe, you understand. We were supposed to be the elite, and now we were being handed off to the army. We were being sent to become ground pounders, and not just any unit, but a Fallschirmjäger unit. By 1945, our paratroopers were paratroopers in name only. We all knew it. They hadn't made a combat jump in a very long time, because we had no planes to carry them and no sky to fly through without being shot down. They had become the Army's fire brigade. Wherever the fighting was worst, that's where they sent the paratroopers. They were just the toughest, most stubborn infantry we had left. We got on a train that same afternoon. No more singing, no more dreams. We were just cargo being shipped to the slaughter. I felt like I had been lied to, but there was no one to complain to. The whole world was falling apart. My little broken dream, it was nothing. Total chaos is the only way to describe it. It was not an army anymore. It was a disorganized mob of men trying to survive. From the moment we got off the train, nothing made sense. We were told to march to one town, but on the way, we would meet another unit retreating from that same town, telling us the Americans had already taken it. So we would turn and march somewhere else. Officers would give us orders, and then an hour later, a different officer would give us conflicting orders. We didn't know where our headquarters was. Half the time, I don't think the headquarters knew where we were. We were constantly moving, marching through the night, sleeping in barns or ditches for a few hours, and the whole time you could hear the front. It was a constant rumble, like distant thunder that never stopped. Sometimes it would get louder, and you knew it was coming closer. I remember the propaganda from Goebbels was still on the radio, talking about glorious victories and strategic withdrawals. But then we would see the reality. We would see the roads clogged with wounded men walking east, their faces gray, their eyes empty. We would see burnt-out tanks and trucks pushed into ditches, and we heard the guns. They always told us the front was many kilometers away, but we could hear the artillery, we could feel the ground shake. It was too close. You just knew in your gut that what they were telling us was a lie. We had no idea what the overall picture was. We won or lost a village. We held a bridge for a day. We were pushed back from a forest. But what did it mean? We had no idea. We were just a tiny piece in a machine that had broken down, and all the gears were grinding themselves to dust. You weren't fighting for Germany anymore. You were just fighting for the man next to you and for your own life, to see the sun rise one more time. Yes, there are many moments, but there is one that is not a memory. It is something that I live with every day. It happened in late March 1945. We had been pushed back out of Holland, and we were falling back into Germany itself. The names of the towns, they blur together now. It was near Ramsdorf, or maybe it was Dulmen. It doesn't matter, they were all the same by then. Rubble and rain and fear. The weather was miserable. I remember the cold more than anything. Not a deep winter cold, but a wet, miserable cold that got into your bones and never left. The rain was constant. It turned the roads, the fields, everything into this thick, heavy mud, that pulled at your boots with every step. It felt like the earth itself was trying to swallow us. We were what was left of a paratrooper company, but we were paratroopers in name only. None of us had seen the inside of a plane for a year or more. We were just infantry, and we weren't even that, really. We were a collection of boys and old men, with a few hardened veterans mixed in. I was 17, almost 18. We had Luftwaffe eagles on our worn-out tunics, but we were fighting in the mud with rifles and Panzerfausts. The British were pushing hard. We knew it was the British 30th Corps. We heard the veterans talking about them, the desert rats. Their reputation was formidable, and they had tanks, so many tanks. Cromwells, Shermans, they seemed to come out of the mist in endless columns. For every one we managed to knock out with a Panzerfaust, 5 more would appear. We had no air support. The sky belonged to them. The sound of their fighter bombers was a constant presence, like a swarm of angry hornets that never went away. We learned to hate clear skies. A sunny day was a death sentence. The rain, the miserable gray sky, that was our only cover. He was my best friend. His name was Klaus. We were from the same area near Cologne. We went through the Hitler Youth together. We joined the Luftwaffe together, with the same dreams of flying. When they sent us to the paratroopers, we stuck together. He was the brave one. I was always more cautious. He thought we could still make a difference. He still believed in the final victory. I think by then I had stopped believing in anything except surviving the next 5 minutes. We were in the town of Ramsdorf. The fighting was house to house, street to street. It's not like in the films. There are no grand charges. It's just dirty, terrifying work. Hiding in a cellar, running across a courtyard, firing a few rounds and then running again. The British tanks were moving up the main street, methodically. Boom. A house on the left would collapse. Boom. The corner of the church would disappear. They were firing high explosive shells at any window, any doorway, any pile of rubble where a machine gun might be hiding. Our squad was ordered to cross a small, open square to reinforce a position in a shattered bakery on the other side. The square was maybe 50 meters across. It felt like 1,000 kilometers. It was pure death. A British tank was sitting at the far end of the street, its turret slowly turning. We were huddled behind the corner of a building, the plaster and brick dust raining down on us from near misses. Our lieutenant said we had to go. We had to, one at a time. Run, don't stop, pray. I looked at Klaus. His face was pale, streaked with dirt, but his eyes were still bright. He still had that fire in him. I grabbed his arm. I said, Klaus, wait for the tank to fire. It takes them a moment to reload. When it fires, we run, not before. It was the only way. You use their rhythm against them. He nodded, but he was impatient. He was looking at the bakery, at our comrades who were being overwhelmed. He wanted to be the hero. A shell hit the building next to us. The concussion threw us against the wall. My ears were ringing. Before the dust even settled, Klaus looked at me and said, Now, I'm going. I screamed at him, No, wait, he hasn't fired yet. But he didn't listen. He broke from cover and just ran. He was fast. For a second, I thought he might make it. He was halfway across the square, his legs pumping, his rifle held tight. I saw the turret of the Cromwell tank stop turning. It was so slow, so deliberate, it pointed right at him. I tried to scream again, but no sound came out. There was a flash of orange and black smoke from the barrel. I didn't even hear the boom, not right away. I saw Klaus disappear. He didn't fly through the air. He didn't fall down. One moment he was a running soldier. The next he was just a red mist in the rain. The shell hit him directly. There was nothing left. Nothing. I just stood there, pressed against the wall, my eyes wide open. The world went completely silent. The ringing in my ears was gone. The sounds of the battle, the shouting, the machine guns, all gone. There was only the rain falling on the empty cobblestones where my friend used to be. You can't. A part of you breaks. A part of you dies right there with him. I felt my lieutenant grab me by the collar and throw me back into the doorway. He was screaming at me, but I couldn't hear his words. His face was twisted with anger and panic. The battle was still raging. The tank fired again, and this time the shell hit our building, and the ceiling started to collapse. We had to move. We had to keep fighting. But I was no longer there. My body was. My hands could reload my rifle. My feet could run. But my mind, my spirit, it was still in that square, in that red mist. For the rest of the war, which for me was only another few weeks, I was a machine. I did what I was told. I fired my rifle. I ate when I was given food. I slept when I could. But I never spoke to anyone. Not really. What was there to say? We were surrounded a week later in what they called the Ruhr pocket. Hundreds of thousands of us. We were told to fight to the last man. But there was no ammunition, no food, no hope. We were just boys waiting to die for a cause that was already dead. When the American soldiers finally came and told us to drop our weapons, I felt nothing. No relief, no anger, just a profound, empty coldness. They were so young, the Americans. They had clean uniforms and they were chewing gum. They looked like they had come from another planet. And I looked down at my own hands, caked in mud and blood and the dust of my country, and I knew that I was an old man. At 18, my life was already over. It was just an epilogue. And every single day since that moment, when the rain falls, I am back at the edge of that square. And I am screaming at Klaus to wait. Just wait. But he never does. He always runs. You don't, not really. A part of you dies with him. The part that hopes, the part that believes in anything good, it just vanishes. I remember falling, scrambling back behind the rubble of the building, and the noise just disappeared. The tank was still firing. Our machine gun was still chattering. Men were still shouting, but for a moment all I could hear was a ringing in my ears. I couldn't get the image out of my head. 1 second he was there, a boy I had shared bread with that morning, and the next, he was just gone. But the war doesn't give you a moment to grieve. Our officer was screaming, "Schmitz, get back, we're pulling back." You move because if you stop, you die. It becomes that simple. You become an animal. You don't think, you don't feel, you just react. We ran. We ran through back gardens, over fences, through the cellars of ruined houses. The days after that are a blur of fear and exhaustion. We weren't an army anymore. We were just ghosts in gray uniforms, running from the noise. The front line didn't exist. It had completely collapsed. We would fight for a village crossroads for a few hours, then run for 10 kilometers. We had no orders, no communication. We just moved away from the sound of the Allied guns. We heard rumors, whispers from other scattered groups we would meet on the roads at night, that the British and Americans had crossed the Rhine in massive numbers and were creating a huge encirclement. They called it the Ruhr Pocket. We had no idea what that meant, not really, but we knew we were inside it. We were trapped. We were just running deeper and deeper into a cage, and the door was closing behind us. That belief didn't shatter like glass. It eroded like a stone in a river. It was a slow, painful process. Back home on the radio, Goebbels was a magician. He could turn a catastrophic defeat into a strategic shortening of the front lines. He could make you believe that miracle weapons were just days away from turning the tide. You want to believe it. You cling to it because the alternative is too terrible to imagine. But on the front, you cannot hide from the truth. The truth is in the faces of the other soldiers. I saw it in the eyes of the old men they sent to us, men from the Volkssturm, with their own hunting rifles and a single Panzerfaust to stop a Sherman tank. They were grandfathers. They knew it was a lie, but they had to fight. The most painful truth was seeing the children, boys, 15, 16 years old. They were taken from the last classes of the Hitler Youth and given a uniform that was too big for them. I remember we were holding a small bridge, and a group of them were brought up as reinforcements. One of them was crying silently, not making a sound, just tears streaming down his face, clutching his rifle. He couldn't have been more than 15, and I looked at him and I saw myself from just a few years before, full of pride and belief, and I saw him, and all he had was terror. That is when I knew. It wasn't one moment, not one battle. It was that boy's face. It was seeing the endless columns of American trucks and tanks on the horizon, a river of steel and gasoline that stretched for miles, while we were hiding in a ditch, sharing a stale piece of bread among 5 men. The propaganda was a loud, booming voice, but the truth was a quiet, desperate whisper that you could see all around you. We had already lost. We were just waiting for the dying to stop. It was quiet. By early April, we were no longer a fighting unit. We were a handful of starving, exhausted men with almost no ammunition left. We were hiding in a barn somewhere east of Dülmen. We could hear American tanks on the main road, not even searching for us, just driving deeper into Germany. They weren't even fighting anymore. They were just advancing. Our officer, a lieutenant who was maybe 22 years old, gathered the 7 of us who were left. He had this look on his face, a look of complete defeat. He just said, "There is no more Germany to fight for. It's over. We save ourselves now." There was no argument. We broke our rifles against the stone wall of the barn. We took a farmer's white bedsheet and tied it to a stick. I was chosen to walk out first. My heart was pounding in my chest. All the stories we were told, the propaganda about what the Americans would do to us, it all came rushing back. I walked out onto the road, holding this pathetic white flag, my hand shaking so badly. An American Jeep stopped. The soldiers in it looked so young and just tired, not angry, not hateful, just tired of it all. They pointed their rifles at us, of course, but there was no shouting. One of them spoke some German. He told us to drop the flag and put our hands up. They searched us, took my helmet, and then just pointed down the road to a large field. And that field, I will never forget that sight. It was a sea of gray, thousands, maybe tens of thousands of German soldiers sitting on the ground as far as I could see. We were marched over and told to sit down. And as I sat there, I felt two things at once. I felt a deep, profound shame for the surrender, for the failure. Everything I had been taught told me this was the ultimate disgrace. But underneath that, there was another feeling, a strange, quiet sense of relief. It was the first time in months that I knew I would probably not be killed in the next 5 minutes. The fighting was over for me. I later learned that over 317,000 of us were captured in that Ruhr pocket. I wasn't a soldier anymore. I was just one of the 317,000. A number. That war is a lie. It is the oldest and most terrible lie ever told to young men. They dress it up in words like glory, honor, fatherland. They show you parades and shiny medals and tell you that to die for your country is the greatest thing you can do. It is a lie. I saw how my friend died. There was no glory. There was no honor. There was just a boy, torn apart on a dirty street, who would never go home, never fall in love, never have children. His life was stolen from him for nothing, for a madman's dream. I want young people to look past the flags and the anthems and to see the human being on the other side. When I was a prisoner, an American guard gave me a piece of his chocolate. I hadn't tasted chocolate in years. He didn't have to do that. I was his enemy. But in that moment, we weren't soldiers. We were just two young men, a long way from home, caught in something much bigger than us. That piece of chocolate taught me more than any propaganda speech. It taught me about humanity. Do not let anyone teach you to hate. Do not let anyone convince you that one group of people is better than another. Question everything you are told by people in power. Think for yourself, because when the politicians have finished their speeches and the generals have drawn their maps, it is ordinary people, boys like my friend, boys like that American guard, who have to bleed and die in the mud. The only thing that matters is life, the chance to live it in peace. Everything else is just noise. Everything else is a lie. Please just remember that.